To understand the crisis that followed Alexander the Great, we first have to look at the sheer scale of the empire he built. This map shows a continuous landmass stretching from the Adriatic Sea in the west all the way across to the Indus River in the east. But this vast territory possessed no unified institutions. There was no standardized bureaucracy or shared legal code holding these distant provinces together. The entire geopolitical structure was held together exclusively by the personal gravity and divine aura of Alexander himself. That structural vulnerability became a critical failure point in June 323 BCE. Inside the walls of Babylon, Alexander died suddenly at the age of 32, leaving behind his newly consolidated territories without designating a clear, capable heir to govern them. The historical record points to a final, ambiguous act on his deathbed. Alexander handed his royal signet ring to his senior cavalry commander, Perdiccas. But transferring a physical symbol of power could not transfer Alexander's perceived divine legitimacy. Without a codified line of succession, that simple handover instantly plunged the Macedonian military elite into a factional crisis. Two warring factions quickly emerged in Babylon. The infantry commanders threw their support behind Alexander's mentally disabled half-brother, Philip III. Meanwhile, the elite cavalry advocated waiting for the birth of the potential male heir from Alexander's pregnant wife, Roxana. To avoid an immediate civil war, the generals struck a desperate compromise known as the Partition of Babylon. They established a joint kingship in name only, elevating Perdiccas to the powerful role of regent to rule on their behalf. This map illustrates how Perdiccas attempted to buy the loyalty of his rival generals. He divided the empire, appointing these commanders as governors or satraps over highly defensible, resource-rich territories like Egypt and Phrygia. Yet almost immediately, Perdiccas betrayed the terms of the peace. He ordered the targeted execution of the dissident infantry leaders, moving swiftly to consolidate absolute executive power for himself. This violent purge exposed the reality of the Macedonian throne. The royal family existed as a symbolic prop. True control now rested entirely on the capacity for military violence. The partition of Babylon created an illusion of a unified government. In strategic reality, the empire had already fractured into independent, heavily armed power bases, needing only a single spark to ignite a wider war. That spark came from the empire's periphery. Ptolemy, the newly appointed governor of Egypt, executed a calculated geopolitical play. He hijacked Alexander's gold-laden funeral procession as it traveled through Syria. Ptolemy successfully diverted the procession, bringing Alexander's embalmed corpse deep into his own heavily defended satrapy. The political logic was precise. As this silver tetradrachm coin shows, Alexander was depicted and deified with ram horns. Possessing the physical remains of a god-king granted Ptolemy a tangible religious legitimacy, outweighing any paper decree issued by a regent in Babylon. This maneuver forced Perdiccas into a trap. To maintain the illusion that he commanded a unified empire, he had to mobilize his forces, invade Egypt, and reclaim the body. The invasion was a logistical disaster. It culminated at the Nile River, where Perdiccas ordered a perilous crossing. Hundreds of his own men drowned in the rushing currents, unable to reach the opposite bank. The psychological impact of the river disaster was immediate. Demoralized, exhausted, and starving, the Macedonian army lost all remaining respect for Perdiccas's leadership. The Egyptian campaign proved that institutional titles carried no weight without battlefield competence. The moment Perdiccas failed to secure a victory, the sacred office of regent became a target on his back. In 321 BCE, a group of Perdiccas's most trusted elite generals, including Python and Seleucus, entered his command tent and assassinated him. The surviving commanders gathered to shuffle the imperial deck at the Treaty of Triparadisus. Antipater was named the new regent, and Seleucus was rewarded for his role in the mutiny with the wealthy province of Babylonia. As the assassins wiped their blades, the power of Alexander's signet ring effectively passed to a new coalition. Loyalty among the commanders was now purely transactional. The assassination and the Triparadisus settlement confirmed the death of the unified Macedonian state. It was permanently replaced by a fractured system where Alexander's former companions operated as self-serving warlords. With the illusion of Macedonian unity gone, a grim reality set in for the surviving members of the royal family. Ambitious men like Cassander ordered the systematic executions of Alexander's mentally disabled brother Philip III, his widow Roxana, and eventually his young son Alexander IV. The generals viewed these murders as a strategic necessity. The Argead bloodline was the last lingering symbol of a centralized, divine authority that could threaten their regional autonomy. With the royal family extinguished, these generals became known as the Diadochi, or the successors. They plunged the remnants of the empire into 40 years of relentless civil war. By 275 BCE, the conflict finally settled into 3 stable power blocks. As this map illustrates, the territory was divided between Ptolemaic Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Syria and Persia, and Antigonid Macedonia. The extermination of the royal bloodline finalized a shift in the nature of power. Legitimate rule was no longer derived from divine kingship, but from sheer regional military endurance. Alexander's unified political state was completely dismantled, yet his underlying cultural vision found explosive success in the aftermath. Desperate to legitimize their rule over foreign populations, the rival Diadochi poured their accumulated wealth into constructing new Greek-style cities and monumental architecture. This architectural arms race forcefully integrated Greek language, democratic-style civic institutions, and art into the local cultures of the Near East and Asia. This blending of traditions created what we now call the Hellenistic Age, an unprecedentedly connected, multicultural world that stretched across continents. Alexander's mirage of a unified global empire was physically impossible to sustain, but by tearing his state apart to survive, his generals inadvertently laid the cultural foundations of the ancient world. Alexander the Great is dead, but in 315 BCE, his massive empire still exists on paper. His former generals maintain a fragile truce, ostensibly ruling as temporary governors on behalf of the royal family. But one general, Antigonus the One-Eyed, breaks from the pack. Operating out of Asia Minor, he begins actively purging his rivals, executing fellow governors, and absorbing their armies to consolidate absolute control over the Mediterranean's eastern shore. When Antigonus marches on Babylon, the local commander, Seleucus, barely escapes with his life. He crosses the desert with a small escort, riding hundreds of miles to Egypt to deliver a warning to another general, Ptolemy. Realizing they will be hunted down one by one, Ptolemy reaches out to Cassander in Macedonia and Lysimachus in Thrace. The 3 generals quickly bind themselves into a strict defensive military alliance. For the first time since Alexander's death, the successors abandon their proxy skirmishes. They form a coordinated geopolitical bloc entirely dedicated to containing the expansion of a single rival. The coalition strikes first in the Levant. At the Battle of Gaza in 312 BCE, the combined forces of Ptolemy and Seleucus intercept a massive army led by Antigonus's son, Demetrius, and shatter his infantry lines. This image shows the massive defensive scale of Babylon's mud brick walls. The victory at Gaza breaks the myth of Antigonid invincibility, providing Seleucus the opening he needs to race back to Mesopotamia and reclaim this heavily fortified capital. Taking Babylon exposes Seleucus to severe threats on his eastern flank. To secure his rear, he marches toward the Indus Valley, where he meets the founder of the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta Maurya. Rather than fight a prolonged war, Seleucus signs a treaty. He hands over vast tracts of eastern territory, including modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. In exchange, Chandragupta gives him 500 heavily armored Indian war elephants. Giving up those provinces permanently shrinks the scope of the Macedonian world. Seleucus calculates that holding distant borders matters far less than acquiring the heavy military assets required to fight his peers in the West. This marble bust depicts the idealized features of Alexander the Great. His image casts a heavy shadow over the warring generals, because legal authority for the entire empire still rests with his young son, Alexander IV. As long as the boy breathes, no general can claim absolute sovereignty. Cassander, who controls Macedonia, decides to eliminate the problem. He orders his guards to secretly poison the 12-year-old king and his mother, Roxana, inside a prison at Amphipolis. When news of the assassinations quietly filters out to the other generals, the response is silence. No one marches to avenge the boy. no one issues a public condemnation. That silence confirms the concept of a unified empire is dead. The generals stop pretending to act as loyal stewards of Alexander's bloodline and become willing participants in its complete erasure. This silver coin minted during the period shows a horned profile, linking the ruler directly to Alexander's divine image. Between 306 and 305 BCE, Antigonus, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Lysimachus drop all pretenses. They formally declare themselves independent kings and begin minting their own royal propaganda. This is the modern coastal harbor of Rhodes. To secure total control over the Mediterranean and break Ptolemy's naval supply lines, Demetrius brings a massive fleet to this heavily fortified maritime choke point and initiates a brutal siege. Demetrius builds 9-story, iron-plated siege towers, requiring thousands of men to push them. The Rhodian defenders repel every assault, burning the engines and holding the walls until Demetrius is forced to retreat. The failure at Rhodes demonstrates a harsh reality. Military technology and individual ambition have hit a hard ceiling. No single king has the overwhelming resources required to crush his peers and put the fractured board back together. At the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE, the coalition corners Antigonus. Demetrius launches a devastating cavalry charge on the right flank, exposing his infantry center. Seleucus immediately deploys his war elephants into the gap, severing Demetrius from the main battle. Without cavalry support, the Antigonid lines buckle under immense pressure. The 81-year-old Antigonus is killed under a shower of javelins, and his army completely disintegrates. The dust at Ipsus settles over the corpse of Alexander's dream. The battle proves with absolute finality that a coordinated coalition of contained states can and will destroy any single general attempting unilateral expansion. This map displays the geopolitical reality following the battle. The known world permanently splits into 3 major stable borders: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the east, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. Yet this violent political fragmentation triggers a massive cultural explosion. The destruction of the central government removes regional constraints, ushering in a highly connected era known as the Hellenistic period. We see this cultural synthesis clearly in this stone statue of the Buddha, carved wearing draped Greco-Roman robes. Greek language, philosophy, and artistic traditions filter deeply into Eastern societies, spreading from the Nile Delta all the way to the Indian subcontinent. These are the ruins of a Hellenistic capital nestled among modern buildings. The generals founded sprawling megacities like Alexandria and Antioch, creating highly organized hubs that would monopolize global science, trade, and learning for centuries. The successors completely failed to preserve Alexander's united empire. But by shattering it into regional powers, they accidentally forged the interconnected, multicultural foundations of the modern Western and Middle Eastern worlds.